Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Monday, November 4th, 2024. 24 hours to go until the final voting and counting take place. I am John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Media commentary columnist Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, John.
And Washington commentary columnist Matthew Cottonetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
We have two very different vibe effects going on right now. You asked us, watching the election granularly, as we do, you would say that the vibe shift happened with the release on Saturday of the Iowa poll taken by Jan Seltzer that showed the shocking result of Kamala Harris up by 3 in Iowa, a state that is not on anybody's list of possible Democratic takeaways from Republicans, that Trump won by, 9 or 10. She's up by 3 in this poll. This poll is a gold standard poll based on its prior record. And that this poll comes out, the entire political world goes into an earthquake. Trump spends Sunday sounding like a crazy person. She spends Sunday saying, I want to bring the whole country together, after an cheerful appearance on Saturday Night Live. And so I think if you asked people who are like looking at this election that closely, you would say something really big happened. Things have been happening. It's shifting her way. The vibe is going her way. And then I read the New York Times' chief pollster and polling analyst, Nate Cohn, saying, well, if you were going by the data, Trump won the last week. All the polls that we have that are important, with the exception of the Seltzer poll, show Trump closing every advantage that Harris had in every swing state. And that we now have a totally locked and tied election, particularly if you do what's called the full ballot, which is rather than counting simply Trump versus Harris head to head, you actually put in the polling the full ballot, meaning Jill Stein, Cornel West, whoever is on the ticket. And where that is concerned, it really is a jump ball or a infinitesimally tiny advantage to Trump. So we have two different electoral emotional states. One, if you look at the numbers, Trump spent the week closing out whatever advantage Harris had gained since she entered the election. And if you take the people who follow elections closely, you would say that the emotion was entirely the opposite. So that's where we're going to begin today. Vibe versus but there's still vibe.
Couldn't both stories be true?
Not really. Like quantum mechanics, we could be in two different states at once, or particles can exist in two different states at once. Well, how's that, Abe? Was that good? Did I get that right? You're our.
I mean, the vibes are real. It could be that Kamala Harris is closing well in the final days of this election. It could also be that the fundamentals of the election have always favored Donald Trump and the out party. And so Harris could have a late bump, but the question is, will that be enough to overcome Trump's fundamental and long-lasting advantages?
But that's not what the vibe is saying. You see,
Tell me what the vibe is saying.
That's why I'm so confused, because you're saying she closed well, and Nate Cohn is saying Trump closed well. That if the hard...
we're talking about two different types of closure here, John. We're coming to closure.
Back to quantum mechanics. Okay, go ahead.
I think we're in the realm of therapy now, not mechanics.
Nate Cohn is talking about closing in the polls with subgroups, and you and I and the rest of the political class are talking about closing in the air, in the atmosphere. What are we seeing? What are we feeling? Look at this poll that Seltzer drops from Iowa showing Harris unexpectedly ahead. Look at the enthusiasm in some of these rallies. It's a feeling. And Cohn is saying, well, in the data, Trump has, in the New York Times data, has closed these gaps with some of the important subgroups. So I think both stories can be true. And both of them lead to the conclusion that no one knows anything. And we don't know who's going to win this election. And it's silly to pretend that we can predict it 24 hours to go.
Well, and I have to agree with Matt about the sort of general political class vibe shift feeling, because a lot of that is driven by last minute, absolutely over the top partisanship on the part of mainstream media, on the part of her own already in the tank supporters. I was not impressed with the Saturday Night Live thing. I mean, a mirror sketch is about the most basic thing she could have done. She didn't really try to make fun of herself at all. Her rallies are optimistic, and Trump went really dark this weekend, but she's still got Joe Biden out there talking about, well, I'll let you guys do the quote of what he said. I mean, he's still off message. So I'm not sure that a lot of this isn't a kind of try hard effort on the part of the media to really get her across the finish line.
So you're saying that Beth's feeling the vibes that are actually being created by the media and don't actually reflect
But can I just
reality?
Just to add a little to Christine's point here, Trump is contributing a good deal to these vibes with the way he's talking and acting and his pronouncements and his attitude. I don't know what's come over him this past week. He is at the same time saying, well, if you look at the real polls, I'm up 10, I'm up 12 here, I'm up there. But he's going to a place that reminds anyone who was having doubts why they were having doubts.
Well, I think that's the vibe thing, right? Trump is acting like he's figuring out what he'll say if he loses and how to explain it. And Kamala was doing that for a while, and now they're acting like they think they're going to win. It's a switch of who seems to be preparing the excuses for after the election.
Is
and
Kamala
what he
acting
seems
like
to be doing, suing TV
win,
stations for equal time?
I mean, I don't know if Kamala's actually acting like she's going to win. And there have been some comments made in the last 24 hours.
Well, when I say Kamala, I'm referring to Maya Rudolph, obviously.
Right. They both Jim Messina, who was Obama's campaign manager in 2012, and David Axelrod, who was, the guru of the Democrats and Obama's strategist throughout his presidency, have said things in the last 24 hours that make it seem as though they're not quite confident that Harris is going to win. And so I think that you do have media figures and Wilmington, where Harris's campaign is located, projecting confidence. Both campaigns are projecting confidence in the past few days. At the same time, if the early vote, Democrats are not happy about the early vote. I think that's fair to say. The polls are not something that Democrats should be really happy with. I mean, the Seltzer poll is the huge exception, but that's exactly why it's news. It's an outlier. The same day that her poll came out, Emerson had Trump up, I think, 10 in Iowa.
The same state, right? So
yeah, and I don't think anyone. I mean, if Harris wins Iowa, then this will be a landslide win for Harris. That's not outside the realm of the possibility, but it's like right there. It's like it's right on the border of possibility.
Right. Well, okay, so let's talk about what the Seltzer poll says and why, forget the horse race and all of this, what this election will actually demonstrate if what her poll says is true. And it's actually very interesting because it will have a deep effect on what happens in America going forward after tomorrow. Much more in some ways than the effect of what's going to happen in the Middle East or what's going to happen. Because there is a suggestion in the Seltzer poll of something. Very few things can be called unprecedented, but this would be unprecedented. Although Seltzer herself points out that Indiana in 2008, there was a 19-point shift from 2004 to 2008. Obama won Indiana. And Bush had won Indiana in 2004 by 18. And Obama won it by 1. So there was a 19-point shift. So it is not unprecedented for a state to shift 10 points. I mean, Michigan also for Trump shifted 8 or 9 points in 2016. I mean, this would be a pretty colossal shift if she won by 3 when Trump won by 10. Nonetheless, why that would happen, according to her, is based entirely in the gender gap, and not only in the largest sense, meaning women versus men, but very specifically among white older women who, in her reckoning, in her 800 vote sample, are going 2-1 for Harris, which would be like a 25-point shift in one demographic group, in one place, not known for being a place where white women are necessarily leaning to the left. Why would this be the case? Because of abortion politics. That's what everybody says. So Iowa had an abortion bill on the rolls, very restrictive, and that the polling data there suggests perhaps an explosion of pro-choice furor among older white women, meaning women who are themselves past the age when they would need an abortion, but maybe they're thinking of their daughters or their granddaughters or whatever, or the freedom that's being denied them. But all of those are classic liberal talking points about why you need to support abortion. And Iowa is not the place, outside of Des Moines and Ames, is not the place that you would look to for that argument to have purchased. There are these tiny little liberal enclaves in Iowa. They're not tiny, but Des Moines, Ames, Grinnell, a couple of other places. But that's not where it's not where the Iowa electorate traditionally is, though it, has been a swing state over the last 20 years.
Well, can I add, and this isn't a vibe, this is actually a data point, although a small one, named Peanut. There's a sense in which that same voter block of white, older women, especially the ones who are college educated, slaughtered Peanut. I mean, I'm not kidding. He was ratted out by a liberal left, a woman of
I
a
think you
certain
need to
age.
tell people who Peanut is.
Okay, Peanut is an adorable squirrel and a social media star, a rescued orphaned squirrel who delighted millions. And the state of New York decided, even though the owners had applied for the proper permits and whatnot to have wildlife housed in their environment, they wanted to build a rescue facility for other peanuts. The state of New York came in and raided their home.
Like Elian Gonzalez. He's the Elian Gonzalez of squirrels.
The horror of having someone invade your home, like they had to sit outside for hours while everything was torn apart in their house. This to me is an example of a late surprise where that's going to motivate male voters in particular, libertarian leaning, maybe ones who still don't like Trump that much, but are thinking, this is insane. This is not a way to run a government. And I feel like, I mean, I don't know. Men don't vote as consistently as women. But the Peanut Chronicles strike me as a great late stage episode.
What Christine is saying is that essentially Kathy Hochul is the voter that the Seltzer poll is describing. Yes. So you have to ask
it's
yourself.
The ultimate Karen. So basically,
how many governors of New York are there in this country?
I just want to add, this points to the eternal reality that Donald Trump speaks the truth even when he lies. If the migrants aren't coming after your pets, the state is. He knew someone was
coming after your pets, though nobody wants to eat Peanut. I think that is very, very clear.
Says
you. Don't want to eat a rabid squirrel.
But that's what you could be seeing the flip side of the Josh Barro thing. I don't know if you guys remember, but a few years ago there was a problem where the subways kept stopping in New York because of the stray cats running around on the tracks. And so everybody was late, and Josh Barro wrote a column like the New York needs a leader who will kill the cats. The person who runs New York has to be willing to kill the cats.
I think
so. You might be seeing people saying, no, we need a leader who will kill the squirrel in this country.
But Christine, this is interesting because I think you're right that there are certain types of issues, certain types of weird stories that catch, that, turn out to have kind of an effect. If that were the case, by the way, the Hinchcliffe's joke at the Madison Square Garden rally would be exactly one of those stories. A guy talked 3.5 hours before Trump even comes out on stage. He's got some warm-up act. The guy says something offensive about the island of Puerto Rico, And we're now being told that that may turn the tide in Pennsylvania.
But this is the difference between that story and the peanut story. In that first case, the media turned that into a perfect example of everything that's terrible about Trump, and everybody listened to it that way. Peanut is organic. Sorry. No,
Peanut,
this was a story.
right.
I mean, TMZ picked it up, but this was something that kind of burbled up through social media, and I do think this also is a question of how powerful we're going to judge social media activity and stories to have been on this election for both sides, which we won't really be able to tell for a little while. But this was one of those stories that just kind of came up, and then the big, the New York Post, others picked it up.
So, but just to make clear what we're saying here, in 2022, the Supreme Court made an epical decision, literally an era-changing decision, to overturn the constitutional right to an abortion as adduced by Roe v. Wade. And it has had electoral effects. It had an electoral effect in 2022 that redounded to the benefit of the Democrats. And the Democrats are relying, as anybody who lives anywhere near a swing House district can tell you, are relying on abortion to pull them across the finish line, at least to win the House, if not to, let's say, limit losses in the Senate. And Selzer in Iowa finds that this issue is so potent that it has shifted the center of gravity, potentially in American politics, to an astonishing degree. And you're saying that a squirrel may be equal.
No. Peanut is a stand-in for, I think, what are also important. I mean, she might be right. You might be right. Abortion might end up being the thing that decides this election. But I think the economy and the group of people who care about Peanut are also the ones most likely to be suffering in this economy, while being told by Kamala Harris and the elites that, oh, I understand, but knowing really, really deep down that the people who have been benefiting in this economy aren't them. It's the wealthy elite Kamala Harris educated voters. So I think Peanut, I mean, I'm being slightly silly here, but Peanut is a stand-in for the other issues that are not abortion that I think that we'll see if it motivates previously unmotivated voters.
Well, let's talk about what people have been reminded of in the past week, because we're talking about these, Abe says yesterday, and I think it's inarguable if you were paying attention to what happened yesterday. Maybe people weren't, because, there were football games yesterday, and Joe Burrow had a fantastic day, and Saquon Barkley literally jumped backwards over a defender like he was, Neo in the Matrix, and that's what most of America would have been paying attention to. But Trump yesterday said, I should have stayed in the White House because they stole the election from me, and all kinds of other sort of, crazy stuff, and looked angry and aggrieved and like incredibly unpleasant, right? So
I think he called his written speech stupid. So happy to go off script, these stupid scripts. Yeah.
Right. So that reminds you. But remember, that came at the end of a week in which he had suddenly rediscovered some fun, right? The garbage, the Biden calling the supporters, he rode in the garbage truck, and he gave the speech in the vest, and he was dancing some more, and all of that. And then Biden came out also on, was it Saturday? Having said that Trump supporters were garbage, and he said, these are the kind of people that you want to smack on the ass.
Right.
But he said it like Clint Eastwood.
I do think there's a difference between Trump in 2024 in the final days and Trump in 2016 in the final days. Both of those elections, Trump was a little bit more disciplined. Again, this is grading on a curve. In the final, 72, 96 hours of the campaign than he has been since the garbage truck stunt, which was brilliant. And so read into that what you will. It's hard for me to say. I mean, but if you just look at the Harris rallies, she is a little bit more on message than he is. Of course, she's, on message of vagueness. And she had an incident this weekend too, which we should mention, which was someone asked how she would vote on this crime initiative in California. And she said, I'm not going to talk about that now. I have an election to win. I mean, I guess it's just presumptuous for us to imagine that someone who could be the president-elect of the United States within 36 hours of the time we record this might have a position on something. You know, like, oh my God, how dare you expect me to have a position on things? I'm just going to be the president of the United States. So there are like things, data points on both sides where you could say, that's another instance of the weaknesses of this candidate in the final moments.
I just want to add, in terms of her not talking about anything, just to bring up the SNL moment again. The thing about her SNL appearance, I agree with Christine, it wasn't particularly funny. It was the very fact of its nothingness. It was her giggling. It was joy and lightness. And that's the snapshot that she's sort of ending the campaign with, contrasted with Trump saying, I should have stayed in office. My speech is garbage. That's the sort of the split screen vibe situation.
But again, so here's the question about vibes. So the vibe is Trump's angry, aggrieved, kvetching, unpleasant, and she's, holding Maya Rudolph's hand and smiling, and she looked absolutely beautiful. She really did. And looking happy. And then yesterday she was positive and she didn't mention Trump. She only talked about the future and all of that. But 28% is the number of Americans who think the country is on the right track. And almost 70% of the country thinks the country is on the wrong track. So if you were vibing up into an election where 70% of the country is on the wrong track, do you want to be sunny and cheerful? Also, remember the other big news that was literally buried by a compliant media, that the jobs number was just horrendous. 28,000 new jobs in October or September. Can't remember which month it is. It was reported at the beginning of November.
John, with wrong track numbers like that, historically, the incumbent party does not get back in office.
Well, which is why this whole election has gotten so confused, because Harris has played this election, and with the media's complicity, as Trump is the incumbent. And if she can convince enough people that Trump is kind of the incumbent and she is the change factor, that will make the difference. She is somebody who can then somehow be part of the solution to the 70% of people who think that we're on the wrong track. That clearly should not be the case.
But this is where Matt's absolutely right to point out their strategy has been for her not to take a position on anything. And Alex Thompson, who's been pretty dogged in asking the campaign questions repeatedly, has a piece of calling her the no comment candidate. That's clearly a strategic part of this broader effort to make her seem like the incumbent. Obama was on the trail for her this weekend. All he talked about was Trump, as if Trump has been the one in office the past 4 years. So we'll see if it works. But I think that's where a lot of the doubt of the swing voters remains, is like, she's saying, trust me, and don't look at the last 4 years, just be fearful of Donald Trump. So that's the strategy.
These polls say there are no swing voters.
Right.
By the way, that's another weird aspect of these polls. Like, if they said that it was 45-45, then there would be swing voters. If in the battleground states it said that it was 46-46 or 47-46, they would be registering swing voters. Some of these polls that have the full ballot in them are showing independent candidates with numbers lower than we have seen independent candidates garner in 3 electoral cycles. We're talking about Jill Stein is getting 0.7%. Cornel West is getting 0.4%. Now, maybe they're pushing people to make a choice. Maybe this is a false flag because Jill Stein will end up getting 2% or something like that. And therefore all of the poll data will be kind of like fluey because you don't quite know who's going where. And we also know that if RFK were on the ballot, it's likely that he would be getting 4 or 5% in some
right.
way.
Well, this is the RFK effect, what's happening to Jill Stein and others, which is why it's somewhat believable, right? Which is the third candidate in this race is RFK Jr., even though he's not a candidate anymore. But if you were paying attention to the election, the way that Americans normally pay attention, the majority of Americans, you know of one third-party candidate. It's RFK. He's everywhere. Now he's not a candidate. Now he's on the trail with Trump, and Trump's talking about what he's going to do as, I don't know, the director of health and human services or whatever, with fluoride in the water. But RFK owns the sort of name recognition of the other candidate. And I think that has left Jill Stein with almost nothing in terms of branding in a way that the regular everyday American would remember that she's on the ballot and consider. So I think it's possible that she really gets close to nothing.
Or it could be the anti-Trump voter just recognizes that they don't want to throw their vote away for Jill Stein and decide, well, we're going to vote against Harris. But you're right. It is interesting that the third party candidate, RFK Jr., actually is a supporter of one of the two major candidates, and
while still on the ballot,
has become a major figure in this campaign. I mean,
well, that, by the way, was an ultimate effect of the most successful third-party candidate of our time, which is when Ross Perot got 19% of the vote, he was effectively getting Clinton elected. Like, Ross Perot was a spoiler for Bush. That's what he was in the race for. That's why he got back in the race after he left the race.
Right, but this would be as though Perot endorsed Clinton.
No, I understand.
And then they campaigned together.
Yeah.
And Clinton, of course, Clinton did talk. Well, Clinton was pro-free trade. And so it would have been Clinton would have adopted the anti-free trade position that Perot represented. It is striking to me how much the discussion about the election includes debates over what RFK and the Make America Healthy Again movement has been pushing in Congress and elsewhere. And it seems to me that if Trump wins, it will be actually part of the first 100 days.
Oh, great.
In a way that we're expecting. Yeah, we have all these other things to talk about, but
so things are just going great, which is Trump may win the election. Now, we can talk about Harris winning the election. Trans issues go full steam. They push for ceasefires. I
will say that
and
General
embargo.
Jack D. Ripper will be very happy to hear.
Very happy
that President Trump will tackle the fluoridation
be saving our
water.
Precious bodily fluids. Right. But so I can enumerate the things that make a potential Harris presidency horrifying to me or to us. She will be weak. She will push social issues. She will be bad on Israel, as I view it. They will push Israel. They will push for ceasefires. They might institute some kind of an offensive arms embargo. They will try to cozy up to Iran. There's all kinds of terrible things that they could do. And now, what is Trump talking about doing? He's talking about a 20% tariff worldwide. Mass deportations of 15 million people, and now removing fluoride from the water. So he's not talking about it, but RFK says he promised me that this was going to happen on day one. Now, okay, Trump can say anything to anybody, and RFK is a mark if I've ever seen a mark, and Trump knows a mark when he sees one. And speaking of marks and shysters and all of that, let me just take a minute to praise and encourage everybody to go to the Free Press and listen to Eli Lake's podcast about Trump and the art of BS, which is one of the best 45-minute audio documentaries you will ever hear, which goes into what defines Trump's persona. And it's really fantastic. And he does compare Trump to P.T. Barnum, the original American shyster, and basically Trump has made RFK his mark. Like, he has figured out what he needs to say to RFK to keep RFK on his side and going around and promoting him. And so there's no actual reason to believe that he would. He is the guy. He will put the sign up that P.T. Barnum put up when his circus got too crowded that said "this way to the egress" to get people to walk out the exit door without knowing that they were going to the exit. So he could say to RFK, here, go into this room and you can control the fluoride, and it will be the door out of the White House. And then he will get arrested and taken to Gitmo, and we'll never hear from him.
If I could just follow up on that briefly, because it seems to me to speak to what the difference is between the things Trump might do as president and the things that Harris might do as president. Trump has been president before, and we know that Trump's maximalist language didn't always bear reality. So he promised to build the wall and make Mexico pay for it in 2016. The wall's not done, and Mexico never paid for it. He promised, mass deportations in 2016. There was deportations. The border ended up being relatively secure by the end of his presidency, but the most fulsome interpretation of Trump's words did not come true. Tariffs, of course, he uses as mainly a negotiating tool, and whether it's going to be 20% seems to me to be something of an outlier. Whereas with Harris, we actually have reason to believe that the things we expect her to do as president, even though she's not saying anything, will happen, because Harris is not actually a leader. She is a representative of and I'm going to put on my tinfoil for a second, of a system that has an agenda that will go. She is basically going to rubber stamp. And so all of the regulations, all of the Title IX stuff, all of the equity stuff, all the Israel stuff, by the way, that's just going to happen. She hasn't given us any reason to believe she's going to stop it. All she says is, I grew up in a middle-class family, and my values haven't changed. So I do think there's something about the difference between
that she won't stop it.
Well, sure.
Like Bernie Sanders goes around saying, you got to vote for this person because she'll be so much better on Palestine.
So there is something revealing about Trump's BS that Eli talks about, and then Harris's vacuity. One is masking something, and the other is just kind of this performance that's been going on now for 40 years, and creates a lot of messiness and chaos. But the worst outcomes, with the exception of January 6th, are largely avoided.
Just to distill this point in terms of the RFK stuff. So Trump is telling RFK that he's looking forward to him cleaning up our food while he's promoting McDonald's, giving away fries.
It is interesting to hear the RFK line, because there's a way in which, if he weren't such a lunatic, the conversation that he could be stimulating is not necessarily the worst conversation for Americans to be having, about the American diet, about what it is that kids are being fed, about the kind of general behavior of Americans toward food that is inclining the nation toward obesity and children toward inactivity and all of that. The problem is that RFK combines it with a paranoid conspiratorial view that then takes in things that are very important for helping the future of the country, like nuclear power and other things that he is relatively quiet about. And I'm repelled by him as a political figure, but even the fact that where he went first was fluoride is almost comical. Like, fluoride is the greatest public health experiment in the history of the planet Earth. Tooth decay, which was a civilizational problem for as long as people have existed on this earth in the United States, has largely been eliminated because of fluoride in the water. And we know that because we know what it was like before there was fluoride in the water and what it has been like in the last 60 years after fluoride in the water, which is that people are much more interested in how they can straighten their teeth or cap their teeth or do, as opposed to dealing with the ongoing consequences of having bad teeth in your mouth that could have wildly terrible consequences. So instead of talking about some of the more reasonable things like the obesity crisis, he went right to the tinfoil. He went right to the most lunatic view that you can hold, that has been the lunatic view since the 1950s when they started putting fluoride in the water. It's like it was time to go back. It was a nostalgic trip back into tinfoil hat land.
But he has really clouded the conspiratorial libertarian waters in a lot of ways, right? Because what he's arguing what he's arguing that he wants the government to do if Trump wins and he's installed in some powerful position is to take the nanny state up to 11. I mean, don't you remember people on the right going, "Why is Michelle Obama telling kids not to get fat? That's nanny stating them. We should be able to have 40-ounce sodas whenever we feel like it." This was largely an argument of a more libertarian right. He's making it from this sort of conspiratorial angle, but there's also a fair number of conspiracy theories about what's in the water. If you're, say, for example, in an African-American community, that's a long-standing conspiracy theory. So he's tapping into interesting new kind of avenues there. And so I do wonder what libertarian voters think of RFK, because on some things I think they agree with him, but on others he would like a lot of regulation of a lot of things that Americans probably are used to being unregulated.
Well, look, I mean, I think the fluoride thing comes from RFK has he's closely followed by what is known as the momfluencers. There's an influencer moms group of people who follow him. They tend to be a sort of extra crunchy cons. And I don't think it's the same as trad wives and things like that to get into all the terms, but there is a sort of crunchy moms, center right, or right of center, I should say, influencer group that they run in his circles. I mean, some of the people right closest to his campaign are actually some of these influencers. And so he talks like he's running TikTok or a blog or something daily on the daily things that these sort of crunchy calm momfluencers are thinking about. And so each day they're thinking about small, poor stuff like that. Therefore, it's like, to paraphrase Christine, it's like Peanut is a stand-in for the other issues. Fluoride is Peanut here and is sort of a stand-in for the circles that he travels and that sort of.
Look, this is a very important point because it gets to what will happen if Trump wins. What will happen if Trump wins is a weird reflection of what happened in 2016, which is that he may have been creeping up over the course of the year based on the discussion and exploitation and use of issues that the mainstream media do not want to cover, soft pedal, and keep quiet. The most obvious being the border, which under any other circumstances would be an issue that would be that each major news organization would have put 10 reporters on the border to have daily stories about it from January to the present. It's such a big thing everywhere, and it's news gathering, and it's of interest to people, and all of that. They do not want to cover it, and so it has been left to this quiet, persistent thing that is the second or third most important issue to Americans that they never hear about on the nightly news, or they never hear about, they don't read about it in the mainstream press that they might consume. And yet it's still there. And that might be true of the RFK stuff. Like, why is it important that Trump has RFK support? Maybe because he's harnessing these conversations in a corner of the internet where those people will go vote, just like the wrestling people voted in 2015 in the Republican primaries where they had never voted before, and blew everybody else away. And maybe that's the story that we will have to tell on Wednesday if Trump wins, that once again, the conspiracy of silence on the mainstream media about the issues that are uncomfortable to Democrats and liberals ended up boomeranging and backfiring on them. That covering them properly and seriously is a way of regularizing them, making them part of the conversation, forcing Harris and the Democrats to come up with realistic policies to address them, as opposed to giving them cover for ignoring them. And then when they come out, as was true with the Muslim ban, they kind of come out in the worst possible way. We'd had a serious conversation about the Pulse shooting and the San Bernardino shooting and what was going on with Islamism in the United States in 2015 and 2016. And Clinton and the Democrats had been forced to have serious conversations about these matters. Things might have gone differently. That would not necessarily have been a sneak hidden issue for Trump to exploit if it hadn't been a sneak hidden issue. And so, again, my line of argument here only will be correct if Trump wins and everybody goes, oh my God, I can't believe he won again. How the hell did that happen? And the answer is going to be because it was 15 different things assembled, not just one thing. There's no one cause. There's no one anything. But that, he had these targets of opportunity, or the right had targets of opportunity that a bizarrely, as the press faces, the mainstream media faces its potential extinction over the next 10 years, they're hurtling toward.
Yeah.
There was a conversation, Max Tanney has a piece in Semaphore. He got a tape of a meeting at the New York Times between Joe Kahn, the editor, and reporters led by Jodi Kantor, who famously was the Me Too reporter. And the whole thing was him defending himself against charges by the New York Times newsroom that the paper wasn't liberal enough or anti-Trump enough. That's where the reporters in the newsroom wanted to go.
And of course, the Washington Post controversy, that's been dogging us for months,
right?
Even before the lack of an endorsement. I want to pick up on something we've been kind of circling around, and that is how everything is scrambled. And there was this remarkable split screen this weekend when Trump was in Dearborn, Michigan, visiting Arab American voters, and being really quite a welcome reception he received. And he was pledging peace, to bring peace to the Middle East and to the world. And I think at the same time, Bill Clinton was in Arizona or Nevada. I think it was a Sunbelt state, just laying into Yasser Arafat and talking about how terrible Arafat was during the Camp David meetings in 2000 with the final peace deal, and rejecting it. And so it was this kind of bizarre moment where Bill Clinton was really just talking about how the Palestinian Authority is this corrupt, kleptocratic, gerontocratic machine that can't be trusted. And Trump is making a play, it seems, for the Arab American and Muslim vote in the key swing state of Michigan, just as his top surrogate, RFK Jr., is pledging to make America healthy again by getting rid of chemical additives in the food and maybe looking at the fluoridation of the water supply. If you were Rip Van Winkle and you woke up in 2024 after, say, falling asleep in 2012, you would say, what is going on in American politics?
Just to add a detail, by the way, is that he was in Michigan. Of all Bill Clinton.
Bill was in Michigan.
Bill
I didn't realize
Michigan.
that. So it's the same state.
But by the way, that tracks the behavior of the Harris campaign, which, the other split screen was Harris, a radio ad in Pennsylvania saying that she would never abandon Israel, and then having an ad in Michigan saying that Israel should be blown up with a nuclear weapon. So, right. So this thing where they're trying to send both. Again,
I do think that both Clintons have been very consistent actually since
Right.
October
They've been
7th.
giving
Okay, but I
history
want to
lessons
talk
about the
about
Middle East to these Gen
yeah,
Z voters in a way that I completely applaud. Like every time
right.
they're very
Okay,
good at that. That's good.
just to pull back, this is entirely unrelated, but Bill Clinton did something in that talk that is very important for the intellectual history of the United States in the Middle East. Since he was president and since his last 6 months in the presidency, when they made two final pushes to get a deal to create a Palestinian state at Camp David, one before the election and one after. And then in between, Yasser Arafat, in response to the deal that he rejected, started the Second Intifada, the major terrorist war against Israel that preceded October 7th by 23 years, but was the first time that Israel actually had to fully engage in a terrorist war directly in its proximity because of this uprising. There has been a debate led in part by, yes, our old friend Robert Malley, writing in the New York Review of Books and other places, in which the claim was that a myth had arisen that Arafat was irresponsible, reckless, and refused to make a deal at Camp David and at the end of in early 2021, and that this was unfair to Arafat, that he had actually wanted to make a deal, but that the Israelis had been there, blah, blah, blah. And Clinton just dropped a nuclear bomb on this argument, which has been a parallel discussion point for almost a quarter century for people who are paying attention about what happened in the 1990s when Israel decided to take the risk for peace that it is always being asked to take. And Clinton was one of the people who asked it to take the risk for peace, he didn't lead the Oslo Accords. Those were led in part by the Israelis, but had the signing of the Oslo Accords on the White House lawn and pushed things and did this and did that. And we had bits and pieces of this. Clinton saying that he had this conversation with Arafat saying to him, you will be remembered as a great leader. And Clinton saying to Arafat, no, I'm a failure and you made me one. That's a real story that really happened, but we never got the details. And we had this crew of people inside the Clinton administration who have gone on to be leading figures in the ongoing discussion, including the incredibly controversial Robert Malley, saying that it was Israeli propaganda or Zionist propaganda or some kind of propaganda that said that Arafat was solely responsible for the failure at Camp David and the refusal to accept a speech. Clinton said the Israelis had agreed to a capital in East Jerusalem. This is how serious the deal was. That was not, by the way, that's never been said publicly. that the Israelis had agreed. They had said they were going to do land swaps and this and that. But Clinton said effectively the Israelis had agreed that East Jerusalem could be the capital of a new Palestinian state. They were going to get 96% of the land. It was a fantastic deal, and Arafat turned it down. And Israel is blameless in the failures of Camp David, and that basically Israel is blameless now. And it's again just the establishment of the historical record against this parallel line that has bolstered the kinds of arguments that have led people to remain hostile to Israel in terms of its relation to the Palestinians after October 7th. The man himself blew up this weekend, and he's 78 years old, and he looks a little infirm, and I have a lot of problems with him, but I mean, thank God this is a very important moment for establishing a future record of the truth about one of the most important events of the last quarter century, which was the Palestinian rejection. The Palestinian rejection of peace is the story of the last 20. It helps explain everything that we talk about.
It also helps explains what we're seeing now in another important unsaid way, which is that the people on campuses protesting and the people leading all these anti-Israel movements, they don't want what Bill Clinton tried to establish. they don't want a two-state solution. They're marching and saying, we don't want no two states, we want 48, or we don't want no two states, we want all of it, over and over again. And the settler colonialism narrative that has taken hold on college campuses and in academia holds that Israel is illegitimate, Jewish self-determination there and sovereignty is illegitimate. And so Clinton is facing something even more than just a sort of stagnant peace process. His side, or the voters that he's talking to in Michigan, let's say, they don't care who walked away. You know, the prior generation of commentators cares a lot who walked away. That has been a subject of discussion for for 30 years now, or not 30, 25 years. And that's really important to everybody who was there. There's this younger generation who does not care and or who thinks Arafat should never have been at the table or should have walked away at any time, no matter what, that there should not be in Israel. And that is a real shift from when he was there. And he sounds like he has some regret in his voice about the fact that, you know, maybe he's thinking to himself, boy, I was so close. If I had done it, you know, this would be a totally different, this discussion wouldn't even be happening. But that's where we are. And it's a very far place from where he started.
So anyway, that took us to a conversation. I think it's worthy having. Look, Clinton got 89% of the Jewish vote in 1992. George H.W. Bush got 11% of the Jewish vote, or maybe it wasn't 89% because I'm sure Perot got some of it. But Clinton got the largest amount of the Jewish vote. That's obviously why, in some weird way, even though we're only talking about people, you know, who was 32 years ago, so they're sending him out to see if they can bolster Jewish voters in Michigan or elsewhere by talking about what he was talking about, or it's his own idea. You know, he is actually the best political strategist in his party, so maybe he decided to do it on his own. Who knows what the game is? But you know, we are looking at this potentially unprecedented Jewish vote for Trump. That's also an interesting question about the final week. Like, is that the kind of thing where people who are really going to do something that is really something that they never thought they would do before? Has Trump done things over the last week to make them go, nah, I'm not going to do it. I just can't do it. I think that's what Abe was alluding to, that his behavior from the Madison Square Garden rally onward might incline people who were just there to go, can't. But we won't know. And we won't even know that. I mean, we'll know this stuff where people say, but by the way, the other thing is, and we should maybe move on to this, there's been a classic thing where late deciders are really vital to elections. In almost every election you look at, like they broke for Trump, they broke for Obama in 2012, putting him over the hump. They broke for that, they broke for that. 75 million people have voted already. So, and most of those voted before the last couple of days. So let's say 65 million people had voted before Wednesday or something like that. So that's close to half of the expected electorate, 75 million. Maybe it is half the electorate. So the late decider does not play the role the late decider used to play.
Well, I just want to say on the 2020 too. I mean, late deciders, I think, moved toward Trump in 2020. But
they did, but not enough, right? Because he was really far behind.
Biden's huge advantage going in.
I just want to say on the point about the Jewish vote and those Jewish voters that would previously have never voted for Trump or maybe never even voted Republican before. If they, before this past week, if they have come around to saying I have to vote for Trump, nothing that happened in the last week, I think, would dissuade any large part of them. I think for them, it is too clear-cut a decision that's already they've made that in terms of Israel, whatever layer of outreach he's now going for among American Muslims or whatever, it does not interfere with their contention that he's simply the better choice on Israel.
I think it's less important now to change the minds of undecided voters than it is to convince them to vote in the first place.
Yeah.
Right. And you see that in both campaigns. Trump, of course, really depending heavily on the idea that younger men are going to come out and vote for him. Where the Harris campaign, it seems, are basically trying to appeal to what I'll just call the Matt Continetti vote, because they've released these ads by Harrison Ford and Will Ferrell, two of my favorites, in the past few days, making a plea to come out and vote for Kamala Harris. And I think the Ford ads are more interesting than the Will Ferrell. I mean, Will Ferrell's great, but Harrison Ford doesn't usually do this. And the language of one of the ads is very interesting. He says, look, I don't agree with a lot of Kamala Harris says, which is interesting in itself because she doesn't really say anything. But the fact is that the people who worked for Trump in the first term don't think he should have a second. And that's enough for me. What that communicates to me is that off the record, hot mic moment that Harris had recently with Gretchen Whitmer, where she said, we have to move among men. We have to make up ground among men, is real. And so they're deciding, hey, who's the figure that played such a big part of Gen X and older millennial lives, male lives in particular? It's Harrison Ford, the figure of authority. Maybe he'll convince these layabout males to come off the sidelines and vote.
So it wasn't that ad with the real men.
That's not the real men. The real men that
were crossing
flopped.
Their legs prettily.
You're getting Harrison Ford now, and no one's doubting him. And he's in his, he's getting old too.
He's 84 or something.
He's pretty old, but I think it's clearly aimed for people in my demographic.
Oh my God, does he look good?
I had Star Wars bed sheets, and I got when I was a kid, and I got to tell you, he's held it together better than anyone.
No, he's on this. He's on this Apple TV show called Shrinking. Yes. He looks he looks really good for he looks. And then of course we have Jeff Dunham's Walter puppet in the White House. Joe Biden, I sent you guys this screenshot of Biden as he was saying the kind of people you want to kick in the ass, and his face looks like a death mask as his lips sort of stretch past his teeth. I mean, it's like you really do think, what if there's been this weird thing over the last week, like, maybe if he had just stayed in the race, he would have done better. I mean, that guy, it would have been an interesting social experiment to see what would have happened had he actually been the candidate for president by now.
He can't get through a Zoom call. I mean, I'm worried about election day to inauguration day. That is going to be whoever wins.
Well, let's talk about that. Something major is about to happen internationally that the United States government is going to have to make a choice about. I mean, stuff can happen we don't even know about. But Iran is going to be striking Israel. Everybody says it. Israel says it. They actually thought it was going to happen a week ago Saturday. It didn't. There's all this talk that somehow Iran knows it should wait until after the election so that it, because nobody knows what role that will play, and that they would prefer to have Harris there as opposed to Trump. But who knows if they would prefer to have Harris, or if they are even, why sort of worldly enough in a weird way about America to know that it matters whether Trump or Harris is president. Although we do know the one person they're trying to assassinate on American soil is Trump. We don't hear that they're trying to assassinate Harris, which would indicate that they were more concerned about a Trump presidency. But there is going to be more more shooting and fighting between Israel and Iran. And the intelligence says that Iran is going to engage its regular army. And we don't really know what that means. Apparently it means activating Iranian forces in Iraq, which is of course hundreds of miles closer to Israel than Iran is, but we don't know what that means. And they're not going to like cross Jordan or whatever, or cross Syria in order to get to Israel. But this is a very strange moment, and there is a president of the United States who is clearly senile, who is going to have to make the decision about what's happened. Maybe it's all on autopilot. We don't know. We do get these mixed signals where Harris is still talking.
Well, let's just take what happened last time real quick, which is that in the transition in 2020 after the 2020 election is when the Ethiopian civil war blew into the open, and the Ethiopian troops sort of waited until it was in the transition moment, went in, and nobody knew what to do. Nobody had anything in place. Trump was busy with the election, challenging and all this other stuff. We were all fighting sort of amongst ourselves. When Joe Biden came into office, he didn't have a Secretary of State yet, and he went to his fellow Delaware Senator Chris Coons, who's a good friend of his, and he made Coons the envoy to this particular conflict because he didn't have somebody confirmed in office yet. So that's the model, which is that nations do know that you can take advantage of this chaos, that the vacuum does persist, and that Americans don't just wake up and go, oh, they're trying to put one over on us, that you can actually get months of messiness in between in this transition period.
I'm also interested in what happens after the coming Iran attack, right? Because after the first one, Israel was, the U.S. requested that Israel takes the win because of the tremendous missile defense. So Israel sent I would say, relatively small but poignant message with some high-tech weaponry, long-range weaponry that perhaps Iran didn't know it had. After the second Iranian attack, once again, the U.S. minister to Israel and said, don't go after the oil infrastructure, don't go after its nuclear program. So Israel didn't, but did tremendous damage to Iranian air defenses and all sorts of military production facilities and so on. Now, after a third, what is we know what's on the table for Israel. What are they going to choose among their options, and who are they going to be listening to, and why?
And in fact, there's some reporting that the Biden administration has been telegraphing to the Iranians that, well, if you do attack for a third time, we won't be able to restrain Israel again.
Right.
Thanks, Biden administration. That's kind of admitting what they've been doing now for over a year.
Well,
which means the nuclear sites, right? I mean, let's be frank.
No, it could be the oil site. It could be the refineries. It could be, and all that. And again, all of this, this is where, this election does matter, because what Israel does will be in part responsive to the results of the election in this sense, which is, I think if they have a capacity to hit the nuclear sites, which we don't know that they have, but if they have a capacity to hit the nuclear sites, Trump has telegraphed that they would be doing him a favor if they did it, if he won. He said on the campaign trail this weekend, Iran can't go nuclear. We all know they need to get rid of that and all of that, but he doesn't want to do it. We know that the Biden people don't want them to do it, not only because they don't want it to be done. They think it's too dangerous to do it. And so Israel's options are very complicated by what happens on Wednesday. When the dust clears, if it's Wednesday, they will have more options if Trump wins than they will have if Biden wins, if they are technologically capable of taking advantage of those options. We do know that they could take out the oil refineries and oil platforms and all kinds of things because there are no air defenses left, and we know that they can fly that far and do systematic damage over the course of many hours. That's what we learned by the second raid and the second act, whatever that was 3 weeks ago. If it was 3 weeks ago, I can't even, every time is a flat circle and I don't remember anything anymore. So they could do it, or they could do something. So that is where history is contingent, and this is one of those moments where history will be contingent, but Biden will still be president. That's the point. It's Trump won't be president, and I don't know what Biden would or would not or could not, do in response. But the behavior of the Biden administration in terms of Iran, again, has not been bad. It's important to note that it has not been bad, even though there is the message of restraint. But I mean, they did move the THAAD weapons. They did, they have participated effectively in the Israeli, not only in the Israeli defense, but they participated at least logistically in the strike, sharing intelligence information and stuff like that was necessary, because there's a gap in Israel's intelligence understanding, literally of a couple hundred miles, where they don't have any resources or information. So,
but can we just?
Yeah,
that's fine, but we have to say the Biden administration's behavior toward Iran before October 7th was terrible.
Oh, and even now.
Yes.
I mean, it's only in relation to this question of whether or not it's okay for Iran.
Yes.
Yeah. No, I mean,
and in terms of also on the subject of sharing intel with the Israelis, the Biden administration is sharing an awful lot of intel with the Iranians, not intentionally from Biden, but he's presided over a sieve that has opened up directly between the two, with Rob Balley being under FBI investigation, and now another leak, the leakers now being under FBI investigation.
Yes.
On the Iranian leaks.
A Democratic Party that was very keen on, and still is keen on, talking about foreign interference by the Russians in our elections. I've heard not a word from the Biden administration or the Democratic Party about Iranian influence on this election. Obviously, the assassination attempts, but there have been many other efforts on behalf of the Iranian regime to undermine this election.
No, to be fair, they did report it. I mean, Merrick Garland, I think, issued a statement at the end of September or something, saying the Iranians are mucking around in our elections. But he said it once, and then you never heard a word about it again. And once again, this complicit media means that the people who know, and the people who don't know can't. The information won't break through. Okay, so I'm now going to ask this question, and we don't have to answer, but I figure I should ask it. Never asked it before. You don't know what I'm about to ask, but I will now ask this question. Do you think that we should say whom we think will win tomorrow? Or should we keep our powder dry and not go on the record? Would we be... I'm not saying endorse. Okay? We don't endorse. I'm not saying... I'm asking...
Have you done any calculations? Have you... Because I have not. I have no data, other than to go by the different projections and models and RCT
Well, I happen to have some secret... I have a list of 205 secret polls in my pocket.
Well, that's what I was going to suggest, because, the people who tend to make these predictions, like my friend Henry Olson has a prediction up in the New York Post this morning. He, of course, goes sometimes county by county looking at different voter registration numbers and polling and such. He does think that Trump will win. But I don't have anything more to add than to say that I think that Trump will win the election. But I do.
Okay, so you've said it.
Oh no, but as I've been saying, I've had this 2022 specter of the past sitting on my shoulder for the past several weeks. And the Seltzer poll, for example, that was something that said to me, that specter said, "See, you always think this red wave is coming, but 2 years ago it didn't really show up, and that could happen again." So that's all I can say, John. Because I don't have the results. Yes.
I didn't say you had the results. You have now said that you think that Trump will win the election. So you have now answered the question, should we or not? No one else has to say.
It was a trap, Matt. That's not fair.
It's a trap.
No, I'm speaking what I think.
Collective shrug.
Who's the one who says it's a trap?
Is what is appropriate.
Our other guests don't want to say.
Who's the one who says it's a trap in Star Wars? General
Leia to Luke.
No. It's Admiral
Akbar.
Admiral Akbar.
That's
Thank
that
you.
trap. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
okay.
won't. I won't let Matt hang out there alone.
Okay.
And I'll also create a little tension.
Friction.
Yeah, a little
Yes.
friction, rather. I don't have a strong feeling about this at all, but I'm a bit of a sucker for the vibes. And I would be less surprised, let's put it this way, if Kamala won than I would be if Trump won.
Okay. Seth and Christine, you want to play or you don't want to play? You don't have to. Seriously.
My prediction is 4 more years. There will be 4 more years.
Okay.
And I honestly have no idea. No idea at all.
Two things. I mean, as I've told Abe, like hour by hour, I bounced all week. It's like very nauseating. It's totally destabilizing. Like it matters. It doesn't matter what I think. It doesn't matter whether I think she's going to win or he's going to win. It means nothing to anybody except maybe my own peace of mind. Even there, it doesn't matter. I had this move to Trump winning this morning solely because of that line that I started the podcast with from Nate Cohn, saying, going by the last week, you would say that Trump had the better week. And I did not feel that that was the case. And I don't think that the New York Times' leading polling analyst saying Trump had the better week was an easy thing for him. He's an honest guy. I find him, I think he's been an extraordinarily positive presence in political analysis over the last 10 years, unlike everything else that has appeared as political analysis in the New York Times. And that sentence could not have been easy for him to write. And I'm like, if I am affected so much by the vibey stuff that I haven't registered fully that the overwhelming story of all of these polls, which could be hurting, we had the whole conversation about hurting with Chris Starwalt last week. So it could be that they're all just trying to find the same result so that nobody gets yelled at for getting it wrong. But I did not register the fact that the long range story of the last week to 10 days is Trump closing the gap in all of the swing states to where it's basically not only it's like not even a jump ball. It's like they're a tenth of a percentage point separating them in 6 out of the 7 swing states. And she was up by 1 or 1.5 in most of them. And that's not really a significant move, but it's something if you're going to go by motion, as opposed to stasis.
I have to add something to what I said because I said I'm a sucker for the vibes and I don't want this thrown in my face all over social media, which I didn't mean I partake in the vibes. I meant I'm a sucker for them as a possible predictive element in figuring this out.
I think it is fair to say that everything that we see would suggest that Trump should have walked into this election, and that if he's not walking into the election, it's because of things that he did that have prevented him from walking into this election. She's a bad candidate. He could have done better she won the debate because he did badly in the debate. He goes off message and says crazy stuff and lets his idiot sons run a gigantic event at the most important arena in the United States that ended up at the very best being a minor mistake and at worst being an election changing event. He goes nuts. He starts talking about wrong track ending at 70 with the sitting president of the United States at 41% approval, with Kamala Harris not having an approval rating over 50%. He should have won this election. So if he doesn't win the election, it's all on him. She has not made the case for her reelection. Maybe Dobbs made the case for her reelection. Maybe no other issue, by the way, other than Dobbs and maybe democracy or January 6th, has made the case for her reelection. And so if he wins, he will be winning despite himself. And he doesn't deserve to, because he's an irresponsible, reckless, and bad candidate who is self-indulgent and doesn't care about anybody else and about his party and about anything. And yet I right this moment at 9:10 a.m. or whatever time it is that I'm speaking, I would think it was more likely that he was going to win than she was going to win. But what do I know? Will say that in 2020, I didn't think that Biden was going to win by 7 or 10 or whatever it was. That didn't feel right to me. But of course, I didn't think he was going to win in 2016. So, but then who did?
Well, it's what you're describing is that any result is overdetermined. Whatever happens, we'll be able to list 10 reasons off the top.
I thought he was going to win in 2016.
That happened.
You did?
Yeah. And I'll tell you the moment when I thought that, which was the moment during the World Series when Nate Silver said on Twitter that the Cubs have as big a chance of winning the World Series as Donald Trump has of winning the presidency. And then the Cubs won the World Series. And so I said, okay, Trump's going to win. And I started preparing everybody around me that would happen.
But where was I? We were in. I don't remember you preparing.
You were yourself. You were saying, "No way, no way."
But you weren't preparing me. Maybe if you were
preparing you, I try. It doesn't have any effect. So I just I go along.
My memory of 2016 was that our office then was at 40th and 7th in New York. And at around 8:30, I went home. I left the office to go home to follow the election results. And I was on the Times Square number 1 train subway platform waiting to get on the number 1 train. And I was looking at Twitter on my phone. And there was something like, the South Florida Democratic vote seems to be coming in a little slowly. And then I was like, oh my God, he's going to win. Like, it was like these weird uses of verbs by the people who were trying to summarize what was going on as Miami-Dade and Broward and wherever else was coming in. And I was like, it's like he's maintaining his lead in whatever county he was maintaining his lead in. And I was like, well, they just told me an hour ago that wasn't going to be happening because soon the precincts were going to be reporting that would sort of put Hillary up.
And they often do, right? I mean, I sat there saying, well, Detroit's going to come in and Philadelphia's going to come in. Right. And that's how elections go.
That was later. That was later. That was already later. There was something about the way that Florida was being talked about. And then when I got home and you looked at the expressions on the faces of the people on MSNBC and this kind of dawning real, at first they still thought that she was going to win. And I think the Needle, the famous Nate Cohn,
Needle started out with 85%.
Right. But the Needle was still in the 70s, but it had dropped.
It was dropping.
Yeah. And you could see this expression on their faces. And while
it plunged.
I was not a Trump supporter in 2016. The sheer joy of watching the liberals melt down on election night 2016 was something I will not soon forget.
And then you got a call from me probably like midnight, 1 a.m, because I was at the Post.
Yeah.
And it was suddenly the thing, it was happening. And so it was like, all right, well, we're going to need
a column.
Mark and I were up, and Mark called and said, all right, well, let's write the editorials, and we got the column. We needed 3 columns, and we need to put the newspaper together for the edition, and
When did Trump speak? He spoke, I think, at 2:30 in the morning, something like that. And he looked like he had been hit over the head by a 2x4. Like he was the one who looked like he, like all that. We're going to win by a lot. It was like, I didn't think we were. I don't know what is going on here. And and then people were sobbing they were in New York here
at the Javits Center.
at the
Yeah, the
Javits
Hillary,
Center.
the famous glass
Yeah,
ceiling party for which she bailed. Yeah,
yeah,
I had
yeah. And
friends
people
there.
were just standing there openly sobbing, and it hadn't been called for her yet either. That was
Right.
what was interesting.
Well, but they knew. People, yeah,
yeah,
they knew.
yeah. So I can drink liberal tears as much as the next guy, is what I'm saying. But one final point, and then we can close out. All these polls are coming in at 48, 48, 49, 49. There has been a convergence on the idea that this election is a tie. And that really means he could win the popular vote. And I don't think anybody has even begun to understand that that's the case, because these are national polls. We're now not talking about the battlegrounds. National polls are showing 49. That means that he won't win New York. He won't win California. He won't win Illinois. I'm trying to think of the other big, like, harvested Democratic states. He won't win Maryland. But he lost New York by 23. If he loses New York by 15, he lost California by 25. If he loses California by 12 or by 15, and these polls are within the margin, are measuring something, he could win or come incredibly close in the popular vote, because that's a national poll number. That's not a state-by-state poll number. And she is not necessarily going to be ballasted by numbers in the Democratic states that will generate what was generated for Hillary in 2016, when she won the popular vote entirely with the margin of victory in California. So that doesn't mean he'll win the Electoral College. That's what's interesting here, is that we could have the world's ultimate ironic result, which is that Trump will win the popular vote and Hillary will win the Electoral College. Kamala will win the Electoral College.
And that won't be good for the Electoral College, because when you have two parties align on one thing, that means that thing is not going to last very long.
They won't be aligned, though. They will forget. One party will forget that they were ever aligned against it, like the filibuster, and the other party will they'll take turns.
Possibly.
I think that it's what we deserve. There's some way in which the last 8 years of our politics, the perfect summation of the last 8 years of our politics would be for Trump to win the popular vote and Kamala to win the Electoral College, so that everybody has to deal with that transvaluation of values that Matt was talking about, in terms of if you were Rip Van Winkle, because Democrats have been talking about the injustice of the Electoral College since 2000, and the Electoral College will be their salvation. And anyway, would be, as I say, just...
I do think that would be, in terms of political stability, the worst outcome of this election, because I do think that Trump will try to take electors from her, through faithless electors and other means. And so he will make a claim to popular legitimacy if he wins the popular vote. And so we will have months where we try to change the election.
And Democrats will have very grave difficulty arguing the unbelievable horror of what Trump did from November 7th, 2016.
Well, I agree with Seth that they will definitely suppress any bad thoughts in order to make that argument. But I would just look at the Clinton parallel, which is, of course, Democrats rallied around Clinton during the Monica Lewinsky scandal, but then very quietly they let the independent counsel statute drop afterward. And so I think what would happen if this, kind of far-fetched outcome, but still within the realm of plausibility, that Trump wins the popular vote, but not the Electoral Colleges, we'd go through this period of social instability, but then down the road, both parties would decide that the Electoral College is no longer in their favor. And that means that, how you get around it. There's been different types of national compact, right? There is, of course, the constitutional option to amend it and to change it that way.
Yeah.
I could see that in our future.
I just think for the immediate period, Democrats would not have a leg to stand on attacking Trump's effort on the faithless elector matter, because there was a sustained effort in 2016 to find faithless electors. Now, it wasn't the national party's design, but it was all over the place, and there were two. You will remember that I think the Trump Electoral College count, when it was delivered to the vice president, was 304, not 306. Though I think
she also lost one, so it made it weird.
Oh, was it? But and then I think they were all somehow weirdly restored on the basis that the faithless electors had violated faithless elector statutes in the states or something. And so I think he ended up officially with 306. I don't remember how, or everything. Like, if you look, it doesn't say, I believe, that he didn't get the full complement of his electoral vote. But the faithless elector approach was argued by Kerry. But in 2000, there were Democrats arguing for a faithless elector game because Bush only won by one state, right? Bush only won that Bush won 286 electoral votes. So therefore, Kerry only needed 17 faithless electors, right, to turn the tide. That wasn't the case here, but
the interesting point there too would be Trump is on track to having gained votes in every election, and that's
63 2016, right? 74 2020,
and he's now polling slightly higher than his 47% in 2020. Yeah. So if he does get 49%. Or 48% of the vote, that's even more vote. So what does that say? That after 8 years of all that we've been through, he ends up gaining every 4 years. You would think that would cause, if it happens, a huge reevaluation on the part of the political class in Washington. But of course, that's not
and Seth
what's going to happen
his head
at all.
By the way, another data point which is important in this respect is that Trump went up from 63 million to 74 million. It's a gain of, I don't know what that is, 22%, something like that. Oddly enough, in 2004, Bush's gain from 2020 to 2000 to 2004 was 22%, and Obama lost 4 million voters from 2008 to 2012. He went from 70 million to 66 million. The only time in American history, or modern American history, that in re-election, a president who succeeded in getting reelected got fewer votes the second time than he got the first, which you could say was the beginning of the signs of the electoral troubles of the Democratic Party that have only persisted. That Obama did represent the possibility of a new American consensus in the wake of Iraq and the financial meltdown, and that he so grievously mishandled it that not only did he get fewer votes in 2012, not only did he lead to the Republican takeover of the House in 10 and the Republican takeover of the Senate in 14, but he led directly to Trump in 2016, and that Trump improved on his standing with the American people from 2016 to 2020, and seems, as Matt says, to have improved on his standing with the American people despite January 6th, and despite being 78 years old, and despite being indicted, or maybe because of the 4 indictments, or the 34, 91 indictments, or whatever, and despite being found liable for sexual assault, and despite being found guilty of fraud, and despite being found liable for fraud, and despite being guilty of whatever the hell it is that he was found guilty of by Alvin Bragg and Judge Mershon. I can't remember what the charge was. It was that he wrote the same check 34 times, I believe.
It's always mail fraud.
Anyway,
there's always. By the way, you know what else a reverse electoral college popular vote split will do? It will solidify our 2028 matchup, a rematch of Donald J. Trump and
Kamala Harris. That's right. I mean, Trump really will. There'll be no argument.
If he wins the
There'll be no
popular
argument
vote,
to
who's
make
going to stop
that Trump
him?
shouldn't be the nominee in 2028 if he wins the popular vote. So we may not be getting out of this. This is Matt. This is how you ended on Friday. You're like, I said, I just need this election to be over, and then at least it'll be over. And you're like, that's what you think? Really, we are looking at we're looking at a series of possibilities that suggest that this will never be over. That in 2015, Donald Trump started running for office, and he will be a candidate for the presidency until God takes him and brings him up into his loving arms in heaven. And that is basically where we could be.
And I'm not sure God is in any rush to bring him into the inner circle up there.
But that would appear to be the case. Like, because he couldn't, it's like, stop yammering in my ear already.
Might be an undecided voter up there is what we're talking about.
So we're going to do something fun that we don't ordinarily do. We're going to do 3 commentary recommends. Because Seth has one, Matt has one, and Abe has one, and they're all good. So
I can hold mine until tomorrow.
All right, we'll hold yours until tomorrow.
Okay.
Seth, be very brief in yours.
Yeah, so I'm recommending Woman of the Hour, which is on Netflix. It's the first, it's Anna Kendrick's directorial debut. She also obviously stars in it. So it's a good look at what she, where her career is headed also. But it is the story of Rodney Alcala, the serial killer who was eventually convicted of killing a handful of people, but the numbers may have been even higher. He went on the dating game in the middle of his serial killing run and tried to pick up another victim on the dating game. So Anna Kendrick's movie, she is that woman, and so she also puts in stuff about her career, trying to make it as a struggling actress. And then eventually the only thing she really gets cast on is the dating game. And then she kind of lets loose on it. But it's mainly about what happened there and after the serial killer. He was eventually caught. As the movie tells you, he was also released on bail, during which time he killed again. I believe 2 more. It's the underlying Rodney Alcala story is wild. His first victim, if I remember correctly, though it's not in the movie, was like 8 years old. It's a wild story that, some people say he may have killed 100 people. And she just sort of gets plunked on a date with him. Let's go to Calabasas, on our game show date. But it's very good. It's taught. It's very, it's not long. It's not talky. It's just, and I think also the Daniel Zavato, who plays Rodney Alcala, probably deserves some props there too, because he plays a guy who looks like a normal guy from the time, and but he has a sort of quiet creepiness behind the eyes, and he plays it well.
Okay, great. So that's Woman of the Hour on Netflix. Abe, we want to do a commentary recommends tribute.
You got it. Well, I had sort of one piece of it in mind. Okay. We just lost the great Quincy Jones, who's an extraordinary musician, trumpet player, but perhaps better known for his arrangements, compositions. As a producer, his career spanned too many decades to recount, too many genres to recount. So what jumped out at me when I read the news this morning, and I went back and I started listening to, there's a 1964 album by Frank Sinatra and Count Basie called Might As Well Be Swing. Taking a step away from it for a second, there was a 1962 Sinatra Basie album called something like A Historic First. It's a good album. The 64 album, Might As Well Be Swing, is a fantastic album. And a difference is that these are Quincy Jones arrangements. And it's the classic, indelible versions of things like More, The Best Is Yet to Come. What else is on that album? Fly Me to the Moon. These extraordinary, almost quirky, but beautiful arrangements. And it's a tremendous album. And there is nothing on it from start to finish that is anything but pure joy. So that's my recommendation. Might as well be swing.
It's worth just going and reading the obituaries or the pieces about Quincy Jones today, because his life journey is one of these American stories that makes you proud to be an American. And what I mean by that is, we keep talking about inequality. America's it's unfair, and people, only the rich can get ahead and all of that. And a lot of that is, obviously it's better to start out in a position of affluence and strong education, all of that, to have a good life and all of that. But America is full of these stories of these people who come out of nowhere and develop these skills and talents that they can exploit, as long as they are open to it and determined and serious. And Quincy Jones is one of these just amazing cases of a kid at the age of 11 who saw a piano in the corner of a room and started to tinkle on the piano. And by the time he was 15 years old, had learned how to play the trumpet, was given a chance to play in Lionel Hampton's band. Lionel Hampton's wife said, "You are not coming to play in the band, Quincy Jones. You go and finish high school before you start. You're going to be fine. Don't leave and do this now." And he listened to her. He went and finished high school. He met Ray Charles when he was 16. He met everybody. He started in the Hampton band. He played with Dizzy Gillespie. By the time he was 25 years old, he had mastered a bunch of instruments. He had played with everybody, and he started out on his own. And the whole point is that he made the most of a life in a most astonishing way. And that's what America can do for people that it is given no credit for, which is, if you're there and if you can make the moves, there is no place on earth that gives you the opportunities to become a great man than the United States. That's what I thought of when I was reading these obits. And there's so much more. And of course, we haven't even mentioned, the fact that he changed the nature of producing by becoming a famous who is a famous record producer, most famous record producer ever lived, because he produced the most successful album ever. That was Thriller by
Well, he was
Michael
the kind
Jackson.
of creative genius who got what made everything good. He understood what made jazz good. He understood what made a great pop record. He understood what made a great dance record, and so on. And
anyway, so that's my praise for America on the cusp of its, I don't even know what number election this is, right? So on the cusp of its 64th presidential election or something like that.
I actually think it's the 60th presidential election.
The 60th presidential election. So here we are. All right, well, we'll be back tomorrow to figure out what to talk about before we actually get election results. And until then, for Abe, Seth, Christine, and Matt, I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.